Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Omega conversation. I have been watching the chat. You have joined from across time zones and across continents, so we're very, very thrilled. Today, I am Manuela Roosevelt. I serve on the board of directors of the Omega Institute. Some of you know me. Some of you, I see, have known me for 30 years. Some of you know me as family as well. And of course, the many, many friends and caring community of Omega. I am also the chair of the Omega Stewardship Council. So I hope some of the Stewardship Council members are also joining. I can't see you all. There are so many of you. It's fantastic. I could not be more honored today than to introduce you to a truly remarkable and fascinating doctor, Professor Dr. Tobias Esch, who joins us today from his evening in Witten, Herdecke, or Witten. And hello, Tobias.
Hello, Manuela, and hello, everybody.
So Tobias has participated in workshops and has also visited Omega in the past and is today virtually with us.
I'm thrilled to be there.
He needs a long introduction. But first of all, I want to thank the Omega team for hosting this conversation. Jay and Kelly and Scott and Michael and Kali, who can't be with us today, the marketing team, and of course, the great Omega community who make all of this possible for all of us. Thank you. And thank you all for joining. I think we will have a fascinating hour together. Tobias, you are a medical doctor, a neuroscientist, a research scientist in the field of mindfulness and its effects on the brain and the body, and a long-time Buddhist practitioner. Most notably, you have founded and lead the first primary care clinic in Germany, specializing in integrative medicine that has 10,000 patients in care and has become the leading model, not only in Germany and Europe, but also internationally, of the new medical approach that integrates medicine with mindfulness into ambulatory care. You are also a professor at Witten Herdecke University, and before returning to Germany in 2016, you were a neuroscientist at SUNY, State University of New York, and visiting professor of medicine at Harvard School. You have an impressive background, and Tobias will impress you with what he's going to share with you today. So I just want to go over the structure of the conversation so that we can flow right into it. I'll be talking with Tobias for about 20-25 minutes, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. I will watch the chat, and the Omega Tech team will help me, and we hope to address all of your questions. I will do my best. And then the last 30 minutes are really an interchange between you and Tobias. I will be the orchestrator of your questions, but I hope we can include all of you into the conversation. So before we start, I would like to invite you all to join in mindfulness and in the beautiful collective consciousness that we can share together. And I know you can plug right into it in a nanosecond. It will be 3 minutes. We close our eyes. There will be one chime at the beginning and 3 chimes at the end of the 3 minutes. And then we can start. You're welcome to put off your camera and come back after the 3 chimes. I'll stay on and close my eyes. So Sit comfortably. Feel us. Feel the unity of the universe through your breath. And here we start. First chime. Come back. It's so beautiful and loving to be with you all right now in this moment. Thank you. So, Tobias, no life remains untouched by challenges, difficulties, and frequently traumatic events. In today's conversation, we'll be focusing on traumatic events during which we experience high levels of stress followed by a state of crisis. You have spent years researching how emotions, including difficult emotions, are born in the brain. Given the topic of our talk, can you share with us what insights your research tells us about crisis?
Yeah, thank you, Manuela, for the question. And again, hello, everybody. I'm really happy to be here. It's exciting for me. It's an honor. Thank you for the Omega team. And yes, so the first thing I would like to state about crisis is that we tend to forget that crisis is normal. Crisis is life. Our life starts maybe even before that with a crisis, but everybody knows that being born is a crisis for not only the mother and the father, maybe, but the child, because that is the first separation that we go through. Before being born, it's warm. There's always food. We bath and food, and we are cared for. And then separation, and it's cold, and we have to cry and scream and make our parents, our mothers, stress to survive. So life is about crisis. Crisis is normal, and the world we live in is ever changing. We tend to forget that the world is ever changing. So we are constantly challenged. And yet, this crisis, the change is also a chance, because what our research tells us that you can passively go through a crisis, or you can actually change to the crisis, or you use the crisis as a chance to change. And this could be for the better or for the worse. And what we learned in our studies on subject going through crisis is that some people who seem to recover, and we may come to this later, very nicely or better than others, are actually taking a stance. They are making a decision, since crisis asks us to take an active stance, and then maybe by doing this, influencing the course of life. So particularly in the Middle Ages, people who have maybe avoided for adapting to change, adapting to the ever-changing world, crisis maybe a wake-up call, maybe a remembering, that you have to clean up things, that things have to be changed. You may have got stuck or have avoided change. So crisis is also an invitation to go back to the original course of life, the normal course of life.
So I think Tobias is talking about us. We are the middle agers who may need to wake up and may embrace change or may fear change. So you talked about the normal course of life, and what happens? What happens in our brains during these normal periods of life, or even happy periods? Do you have a happiness model?
Yeah, well, we do a lot of studies for now almost 25 years on the neurobiology of happiness, and so what we consistently find is that biology has well equipped us to actually deal with stress and crisis and challenges as we go through life. We have a body which is well equipped. We have a mind, and we have a brain, and in the brain embedded there is what we call the reward and motivation system. And this shows us the way out of crisis, because it is rewarded what in this particular moment is good for us. And so the reward and motivation system is almost like a friend, an invisible friend, taking us by the hand through life. And so we distinct in our research, we distinct three parts of this reward and motivation, or you could also say happiness system, which would be, we call it A. The part number one is A, to make it not ideological or worldview thing. So A is the wanting system. We want to grow. We want to have something, particularly the young people when we are young. We want to aspire. We want to experience pleasure. We want to learn. We want to find solution for almost any problem. And when we do this, reward is paid. We call this the wanting system. It makes us grow. Also find solutions for difficult problems or experiences. And this is particularly active in the young, because they want to grow and to learn and make many mistakes and have to correct them and learn from them. The second system, and well, this is, it does not only work in the young, but particularly in the young. The second system, B, would be what we call the threat avoidance system, Where in the A system, we want to get somewhere, we want to approach, we have appetite. Whereas in the second, the stress system or the threat avoidance system, we want to push away, we want to get away from difficult situations. And this is particularly active in the Middle Ages, those who are in the middle of or try to avoid burnout. So the moment of happiness then, other from the peak moment for the young, the wanting system, the mastery moment, which is only a moment that disappears when you have it, but you can feel it very strongly. The B system, the threat avoidance system, would be actually the opposite, would be when stress makes a pause, when a difficult situation pauses, when you come home, take off your shoes and the door falls, into the lock, and you have the feeling of my home is my castle. This little moment of relief that you avoid something, you push away something, that would be the second system, the B system, the threat avoidance. And that's particularly the Middle Ages, as I said. And then we have the third system that in our research plays a big role. We call it the non-wanting, the C system, which is when we have the feeling we don't have to go somewhere, but we also don't have to run away from something. We feel that exactly where we are, at the right place, wherever we are, there we are happy. We call it the non-wanting or quiescence or affiliation system. We are connected to us and the world around us. And in this state, we see, particularly older, the elderly people are experts for this kind of state. So these three different types of motivation or happiness, you could say, are normal as we go through life, different periods, the young, the Middle Ages, and the elderly. And we found in our research, and others have confirmed it, that this makes happiness over the lifetime, over the course of life, appear or produce almost a U-curve, where the young are particularly happy, but their happiness is kind of evading, evaporating when they have it, that they can't hold it. Then the period, a long period actually for the Middle Ages, that we call the Valley of the Tears, where happiness is more like a relief. It's not so fantastic. It's more like, oh, I'm still living, I survived. And that's the good news, we call the second or the better half of life in our research, because people above 55, and then even 65, and the highest level of happiness, actually 75, and goes further beyond almost 80 now in studies of others. So this is the phase when you are older and you have seen a lot and you're happily and content and you don't have to go and you seek for any pleasure. You can distinct, but you don't run for every pleasure, and you don't need to avoid life. And so this is the U-curve of happiness that we see consistently in our studies.
I love this image of the U, and I'm filled with hope. The second part of
the best
life
is coming at the end.
The best is yet to come. Yeah. So thank you, Tobias, for this reassurance. I think we all need it after the last 18 months. So this is what your research determines is the normal curve, right? The U shape. Mm-hmm. I think I might have been stuck in A for a little bit longer than necessary, but then the Valley of Tears, I think we all know that part, and then a rising up and an expansion, obviously, of consciousness to be able to deal with events of life. Get less exercised about things. So what changes in the course of this if you experience trauma or crisis, or maybe you want to divide trauma from crisis, what actually takes place? What is it that changes?
Yeah. So what we saw and do consistently see in our data, but we already thought about this in the model that we put out even before we had like the big data sets, is that trauma and then crisis massively threatens this normal curve of happiness. Because, for example, if you go through a period or where you have an accident, for example, and you end up being in a wheelchair, for example, then this curve would not follow its normal course. If you are in any of those three periods and then something very heavily strikes you, then this curve is gone. You will not have the same course of life as you had before. So that's the bad news. The good news is what we found in our studies, and we're doing research on this right now, is that people who are going through crisis are actually accelerating. They are going faster through this curve of life, even going faster through the valley of tears. So they go through the sequence of those motivation and happiness aspects much faster. They grow faster, you could say, also into the state of happiness.
So this is very interesting. So crisis or an accident can propel you into an accelerated path through the U curve.
That's what we find, yes.
And this is neurological. Where does the acceleration or the feeling that you have to accelerate in order to travel through crisis? What happens in our brains?
Well, if we go through crisis, like massive stress, what happens is we elicit a stress response, a fight or flight response. We go into a state of we want to survive. That's for sure, and that's almost a precondition. If you don't want to survive, you will probably not recover in. Also mentally, you will not go into the state that I just described. So one is you want to survive. You make the decision you want to survive. Very important. You activate your fight or flight response. You contract your behavior, your mind, your body. Everything contracts around this single focus of surviving. This may also include your consciousness. The consciousness, everything contracts. You become extremely focused and goal-oriented, and the only goal is to survive. And by doing so, by activating this very, very harsh reaction and the decision of wanting to survive, it seems that the aging, you could almost say, on this curve, the progress on this curve accelerates. And there are some very interesting studies actually recent studies showing that, yes, crisis and trauma would actually increase the speed of aging, not in terms of getting very old and, wrinkles and everything, but in terms of this maturation and thriving process, which will be increased. The speed will be increased.
That's really, really fascinating. So we talked about accidents, we talked about crisis. Let's now enter into the realm of trauma. Do we experience the same high levels of stress if trauma is lived as a gradual and progressive condition that transforms our lives? So trauma can be the result of a sudden event, let's say an accident, or it can be as a gradual condition that sets in your body, in your brain, in your life. What's the difference between stress levels?
Yeah, so there is a difference. Well, to start with, it's all a question of, as you just said, of dose or dosage and duration. So if we call it self-regulation, the ability, and I saw in the chat, to become resilient, resiliere, Latin means coming to the same place that you had been before the crisis, come back to the original state. We talk about growth. So I'm pretty convinced that what we talk about here is not only resilience, but it's really growing out of it and growing beyond it. Not only coming to the state where you had been before, but really, improving even beyond that. We have people that went through crisis and severe acute stress, massive stress, that after years recovering from it actually tell us that what they have learned through the crisis enables them to do things that they have never thought of before. They would also almost be thankful, some say, for the crisis, and don't want to miss it, although it has put a massive toll on them because of what they learned. So yes, self-regulation is what we need. That is something that we have from nature to recover, and is something that is, activates if it's massive, it's an acute stress, the fight or flight response, or we could surrender to the massive stress. Then we would freeze, we would die, basically. And, even if the circumstances are such that there is not a good chance to survive, it is a decision, and it's a mindful decision, basically, to decide, I want to be a winner, I want to survive. And maybe interpreting the reason that you're still living as being a winner already. You're still living, although, and because you live, you're already a winner. That is just this decision. And yes, self-regulation can be overwhelmed by too massive stress, too heavy crisis, or a very prolonged state of chronic stress. Both of them can actually overwhelm the self-regulation. But the place where you feel the wake-up call, where you feel, that this is a moment to have a choice vehemently and are called to action, that's probably more elicited by acute stress. So acute stress, although really, your life is in danger, is pretty often more successful in eliciting this acceleration of growth.
Extraordinary, and I think there's some empathy with what you're saying from some of our participants who have found themselves in those extreme conditions of stress and crisis that we all experience. As I said, no life remains untouched by these things. So let's just assume, Tobias, that we each have experienced, to a greater or lesser degree, trauma. I think we can all be confident that trauma has touched our lives. Are we equipped to recover? What is the leading edge research today that maps the conditions that lead to recovery?
So as I said, it's about self-regulation, and I talked about the brain's reward and motivation system. So we must only look to what activates the system, and as I said, or what the system pays off. So, for example, the placebo response, something we know in medicine, is just part of what I just talked about. It's part of the same mechanism. We identified molecules there, like endogenous morphine, and our team in New York that I was working with identified the receptor for this. So that is really, that's basic science. That's mechanically described, that coming from placebo or from self-regulation, that this is healthy. It is healthy for the body, the immune system, the cardiovascular, the nervous system. So what is activating this response? What is paying the reward? I guess the most important thing is relationship, connectivity. So it starts with the social environment, the social connectivity, which is very important, and this is rewarded. It's also the spiritual realm, having the feeling of being part of something bigger, having a belief system, being and living in a culture that supports you, feeling, at home, rooted and rootedness. That is all rewarded by the reward system, saying that's healthy, that's good for you. And that's what mindfulness practice and meditation teaches us, having the feeling of living inside, being self-aware, having a seat inside your brain and inside your body. So this is where mindfulness practice is very helpful. And this is only one part. We work with the model that, we described the ingredients, you could almost say, for recovery in our model, but then found a model by US psychologist Clayton Alderfer, and it fits so well, and our research supports his model so well. And this is saying that the basic needs, the core needs to recover, to stay healthy and recover through crisis, are abbreviated with the acronym ERG, which is existence, growth, and relatedness. So start with relatedness. I said it's so important to feel connected. Then for growing, for thriving, it's as I said, turning crisis into a chance to grow, and then existence, survival. By just saying I'm living through this crisis, but I'm still alive. The decision of feeling you are a winner. That is something that can be a conscious decision, because if you are the wheelchair, people might point to you and saying, well, your life is hard, it's difficult. And it is objectively. But you could almost say it is this decision of surviving and wanting to survive it. So these three core needs, this is what we need. We could maybe summarize it that we as humans, we want to grow into our true existence, our true being, through relatedness, and relatedness to other people, to our culture, to our belief system, religion, but really truly being connected. That is what it's all about.
Wonderful. I see the chat populating very robustly. So thank you. We'll get to you in a second, in a New York second. Tobias, is there a new frontier after recovery? How can we possibly thrive post-trauma? Can our consciousness expand rather than contract? And can you explain the process that leads to growth and expansion in post-traumatic states?
I have a plane flying over. You might hear the sound. Yes, that is something that we are very interested in learning what actually happens there inside our mind, mostly. And so first of all, it's very important to state that healing and becoming heal or becoming happy, even through and after trauma, healing is much more than surviving. That's very important. In medicine, we tend to forget. We do many things in medicine. As I'm a doctor, always focusing on, the body that has to be healed and survive. But people who have gone through with severe trauma tell us repeatedly that, the body might suffer and might not heal again, might not become whole again. The scarves, and, you could see it, people sitting in a wheelchair, they won't be, come to the resilient state they had before. But still, the mind can travel. The mind can expand. The consciousness can expand. You can heal even by, kind of not detaching from the body, but getting free of the idea that the body is the container for, or has to be, healthy in order to be happy. So people that are, have gone through severe trauma repeatedly tell us that it is a learning curve they went through. They went through hell, many tell us. They've been to the place that we others are afraid of. They went to the place that we all try to avoid, which is about suffering, pain, and death. We all do so many things during our days to avoid to go to this place where these people had been forced to go. And they have survived it. And after surviving it, what shall they be afraid of? Where shall they, many of them tell us then they don't have any fears anymore, or only little fears left, because they realized that they were able to go through this and come out of it, even growing and knowing more about themselves and life. So their consciousness actually not contracting, but getting wider and wiser, and then becoming thankful for this exact experience. So one thing they consistently tell us, and that is so interesting, and I find it fascinating, is freedom. Many of those, and particularly those we do study now on people in wheelchairs after, being paralyzed after an accident. So these people are almost imprisoned in their body. But what they tell us consistently is that they found actually freedom, because it's coming from within. It's not related to the body anymore. It's a state of you don't have to anymore. You don't have to live throughout for, following outer expectations or, what people tell you, because there's not much left. So now they are invited, I mean, and this is what people tell us, these are not my words, to deal with what is left, to take every day as a gift, not look at what has gone, what's not there, but look to what is there and what they're able to do, and then take this as a present, the presence of this as a present. So this is what we call in our research the well-being paradox, that people who have objective reasons to not feel well and be distressed or depressed or unhappy, that people who are objectively having a hard life, telling us with a smile that subjectively they are happy. They, we call it, they detach from the unhappy and the body being traumatized, even the mind being traumatized, to a state of subjective happiness. So this is a paradox, and we are very much interested in learning about this. And Manuela, this is what mindfulness training does too. We learn about finding the things from within. Do you know people like I described?
Well, I'm close to tears, actually, watching the chat and listening to you, and the experience of crossing the frontier of fear. Mm-hmm. And this is very, very moving for, I think, all of us, both from what you're saying, from your research, as well as those of us here today with you who are experiencing or have experienced these states. And the expansion of consciousness that can be indeed supported by mindfulness meditation, to give you a bridge, a step-by-step bridge beyond the frontiers of fear, beyond the frontiers of where nobody else has gone, and beyond the frontiers of your aloneness. Mm-hmm. And I'm very thankful that we're having this talk today, because obviously it is both personal and collective as well. I think our society has gone through something similar on the collective. So, Tobias, is there a last anecdote you want to share with us, or before we go into questions, because I think we have very, very eager participants.
Let me share a short anecdote, because when I was thinking about our talk today, this came actually up into my mind this morning on the way to the university when I was on my bicycle. I remembered a story that once a coworker, my office mate at Harvard Medical School, April Pruitt, once told me. It was a story about her grandfather. Her grandfather had been a musician in his former life and also a clergyman, but he was very much in music. And he was now around 90 years old, having diabetes and many, diseases, could not see anymore, could not hear, properly, not move, had pain. But still, was full a musician, loved music. So he sat in a concert at Lincoln Center, New York, listening to Itzhak Perlman, the world-class violinist, world-renowned, many of you know. And so the room was packed, Lincoln Center was packed, the stage was there, and some of you might know that Itzhak Perlman had poliomyelitis when he was a child. So he is basically disabled and, has huge problems moving. So he needs to take on crutches and a corset and an apparatus, gear to actually move. So audience was there, orchestra was there, conductor was there, and Itzhak Perlman entered the stage, which took quite a while. Then took seat, get rid of his gear, the corset and everything, gave the conductor a sign, a nodder, took his violin, applied the violin, the bow, and started the concert. And after a very short while, people in the room heard a loud pang. And everybody knew what this meant. It meant that a string was broken a string broke. So it was silence in the room, and people were expecting now the same procedure. Itzhak Perlman taking on his gear, his corset, his crutches, going off stage, because no world-class violinist would ever give the violin to anybody, and put on a new string. But this did not happen. Itzhak Perlman closed his eyes, took like a minute or so, then opened his eyes again, gave the conductor a sign, nodded, took the violin with only three strings left, took the bow, and played the concert. Transposing, composing, improvising in real time. And this was the most fascinating concert that people have ever heard. After the concert was done, the last sound faded, stillness in the room. Then people were frantic, standing up, cheering, applauding, giving standing ovations, because, as some said later, they have never seen or participated in such a magical, beautiful moment ever before. And then Itzhak Perlman, raised his bow, giving the audience the sign to sit down again and get quiet, silence in the room. And then he said to the audience, maybe this is what art is all about, and such is life. It's not to optimize or make everything perfect, become perfect, and yet get sterile or streamlined or, a uniform robot, but to make the best, the most valuable and beautiful out of what has been left. So I thought this is a nice anecdote.
What a beautiful story to end with. My goodness. This is so emotional for all of us. I think it's wonderful to share this depth and hope and heartfulness with you. So I am going to try my best to ask some questions here from all our participants. Let me see. What does E in the EG stand for? Somebody wants to be reminded. What does
it means existence. So the ERG model from Alderfer, Clayton Alderfer, E is existence. So the need to have food, to have water, to have shelter, to simply survive and exist. That's one of the core needs. And the other two would be relatedness, to have, being loved and able to love something or someone. And then G, the need to grow.
Yeah, so I encourage you to post the questions on chat, because we have hundreds of participants and I can't see raised hands. So Tom, I know you raised your hand, but could you post your question on the chat and I'll read it out. Another question, have you done any research on the methodology for dealing with the repeating thoughts, feelings, and emotions related to the trauma that cycle through our minds? This dark tunnel that is often also brought by physical suffering.
Yeah, that is. Well, we have done research on the opposite, the healing part, actually. But yes, it is true that with every repetition, and also we did, and friends of ours did studies on the distortion of time, the perception of time, how time perception changes through trauma, which is a major sign of the severity of trauma, because the trauma event does almost stop the time. Time gets enlarged, or how you say, it's spread out. You could remember like seconds would be hours, right? So the alteration of perception is a huge point here, and also gives you a sign of the severity. And each time you remember and repeat it, it's kind of more impressed and imprinted in your memory. But now comes the good news, and the research that we have done and others in the field is mindfulness. Because with mindfulness, you train the beginner's mind. You train the stance, the idea of, trying. And this is for people having been traumatized, a huge problem. Of course it is. And I'm not, romantic here. But the idea of, is there a possibility to find something new, something fresh, which would be a beginner's approach to what is in your mind, to kind of evolve and detach from this ongoing rumination and add some new content to it, which would not be trauma, which would be love or forgiveness or thankfulness, something that you could actually actively add, and we call this positive psychology. So yes, we did research on it, but I would love to make the point that there is a chance to add new content to the traumatized parts by, for example, using mindfulness practice.
So there's another thread here in the chat, and that is, if a crisis, if we're thrown into trauma and crisis ourselves as adults, then we've got to learn all this on the go, mostly by error, right? We're forced into learning all this. What would happen, or what does happen, if mindfulness training is taught at an earlier age, so that we're building resilience, we're building this skill, ability to expand consciousness and hug around the problems in the A phase of life?
This is a wonderful question, and I'm asking this question myself. We go into schools, we apply these techniques, positive psychology, mindfulness, meditation to like little ones. As you introduced, we founded this clinic here for primary care. We see little ones, middle agers, elderly, and we start with meditation with everybody who comes. And yes, since many people listening here are practitioners themselves, as you are and I am, this is what mindfulness teaches us. You come back to the breath, just the next breath. And yes, life is difficult. Yes, there is pain. But the pain is not me. And the suffering that I add to the pain is not me. So I can learn through meditation to take off the suffering, stay with the pain because it's still there. We talk about trauma. There is pain. There is pain. It's not to not look at the pain, but to make sure that I will survive. So as I, as a meditator, have survived the last 10,000 breaths on my cushion, I have done this kind of practice for 10,000 or how many hours. And what it taught me is that after the next breath, there will be the next, and then the next, and then the next. And between the not now, what has not happened, and what just happened is this moment. And even if there's pain, even if there's trauma, it's still me. I'm whole as I am. And this teaches us meditation. So yes, if we would all meditate earlier and more, maybe we don't have to go through the very deep valley of tears and could, and don't need the heavy crisis, the severe crisis, to come to the state of inner happiness.
I would surmise that if we allowed our children to meditate, they are in a meditative state already at a very, very young age. We just tend to interfere with that. The cloud watching state of absent-minded children.
And this is why there's an interesting thing that I have not talked about, but since it fits so well to what you just said, is you remember the U curve. I talked about the U curve, and saying that the young would be like the wanting people, and the elderly would be like being content and wise and all good. And between that would be the valley of tears. And doesn't matter if it's like more flat or a U-curve, but you see when you look at the U that there is almost a holy connection between the elderly, the grandparents, and the grandchildren, the young and the old. And since the young are able to stay in the moment because they just are, the elderly too, many of them do the same. They just are because they're happy and at peace with what is. So those two match. And they do. We find it in many cultures, descriptions of an almost holy relationship between grandchildren and grandparents. In the Navajo cultures and many, many. While the Middle Agers are having burnout and are working, are stressed out, and they just go. And they need mindfulness practice to remember the other ones. With a little help, maybe. They just have it.
Beginner's mind. I would say a concatenated question from Facebook. Does one carry the fear from prolonged trauma in childhood into adulthood? And does that not create behaviors that lead to further stress? And does that stress not live inside on a cellular level and therefore lead to disease? So this is, I think, a very, very important question.
Yeah.
Because a lot of childhoods are marked by trauma very early on.
Yeah. So again, if I, as a basic researcher, I can look at both sides. I can take both perspectives. So to start with what the question implies, yes, the answer is yes. Unfortunately, yes. If you experience severe trauma in childhood, your stress response, the mechanism, the instruments are altered. They can even be altered throughout life, which is very sad. Yes, this can travel through your whole life. It can even, as we know, many of you have heard about epigenetics and metallization of the genome, that yes, it can even travel through the next generation, which is particularly dramatic to think about this, that severe trauma, we only talk about really severe trauma, can even, go to the next generation. So that's the sad part. Yes, and we have done studies on, looking at telomere length and chromosomes and, NF-kappa B, pro-inflammation, nuclear transcription factors. We have done this. Yes, severe stress does produce inflammation and a state that is not healthy, and that stays. But is that all? What we learned from our studies with subjects, a lot of subjects, and all of them, as you stated, Manuela, in your intro, we all experience some kind of trauma. So if there's only, if it's a one-way street towards disaster and unhappy life and being ill and sick, our data doesn't say that. There is an exit. And there is, the question is, can you become happy and content although you carry the results of stress and trauma in your body and in your chromosomes? Because it may not go away. Yes, that's true. But can you grow out of it? Can your mind, your consciousness extend out of it? Can you, as others sitting in a wheelchair or having like severe trauma scarves in their, mind, can they become happy? Although, yes, it is possible. And why we think and we see it is because the mechanism that I described, the idea of being related, even to a greater goal, transcendent into like the spiritual, the idea of I'm part of something that is bigger, the universe of love. And even if it's an idea, it exists because in us we resonate. Even when we went through severe stress, there's still resonance with love and the idea of surviving and growing out of it. So yes, the sad part is it can travel throughout life, but the good part is that can we still be happy? Our results say yes.
So really, it doesn't end until life ends.
No.
That spark that lights the path out of a chronic condition.
Yes, and and this one good question: what is the U curve about? Why is it? Why should elderly be happy? What doesn't make sense? Biologically, we are here to give birth to other human and to expand, and the elderly, they are not. They will not have more children, and why should they still be there? And why are they happy? What is the biological reason? Well, I think the reason is exactly to be there and show that the second half or the last period is still worth looking to and thriving into and growing into, especially when you as a middle-aged or someone who is suffering from childhood trauma have experienced long periods in your life where you did not find the exit and you were not sure if there would ever be an exit. But if there are elderly or older or wiser people around you and saying, well, I know what you mean. I had the same. But look at me. You see my scarves, but I'm happy. That is so important to show us the way out. Our reward system does it, but the elderly, they represent in our society the way out. Because at the end, we all have to die. We have to transcend into a state of letting go. And this great letting go is the story of the U-curve of happiness. It's a story about learning to thrive, to do your stuff, to come through the difficult parts, and then at one point, happily let go.
So this is a very powerful narrative of intergenerational gifting, soul gifting. And it's so important, I think, to open ourselves to being soulfully with children and with elderly.
Exactly.
And commune as well.
We have usually in our villages at the old times, in German we say the village elderly, the chief of the tribe. These were the ones that held the knowledge, the traditions, that knew how we think, how we function, what our culture told us, the ones who keep the secret scriptures. These were the old elderly. And that was their function, because when the Middle Ages were on the field and working, they had no time to care. So who would teach the grandchildren about all these things? That would be the elderly. For that, they must be there. That's one. And the second, they must be people who we want to look up to and want to grow into. So they should have something that is not kind of making us turn away.
I am afraid we are at 3:00, 8 p.m. in Europe, and we must close. We have hundreds of questions, Tobias, hundreds of questions hanging in the air, and I am very, very sorry that we cannot ask you any more questions today, but hopefully we can have a repeat session with you, which may be just questions so that there's no introduction. I think all this is fascinating for all of us because we're all touched by it. We are all in it. And this is the nexus where mindfulness, healing, and trauma, fear, aloneness, survival, and meeting the ultimate fear of death comes. It's incredible territory for us to explore together. So I hope the powers that be can allow us to be together again very soon with you. And I want to thank all of you who participated to the live session. And of course, it's being recorded, so you can watch it again. And I hope we'll see you again, either on campus or for more Omega conversations and more Omega online programming. And above all, Tobias, many, many, many thanks for all of us.
Thank you.
Very, very good. So thank you. Much love to everyone and come back soon.